let's talk about biases. And biases are something that we've had for a very long time, something that all humans deal with. It's especially hot right now when we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning. But the reason why we have biases is because they actually help us. We've evolved to have biases so that we can do a lot of things like make decisions. It allows us to understand what we should actually learn, what we should remember, and what we should do. But at the same time, they do keep us constrained. And the way that they keep us constrained is that we don't take in new information. We don't actually understand new things, or we continue to do things the same way over and over again. And so I guess from my point of view, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of certainty and where we probably need more uncertainty in most of the things that we do today. And so biases, there's not just a few of them. There's actually 130 that are documented on Wikipedia, some of which are like the anchoring bias, where once you hear one number, that number becomes more like the reality. There's prospector theory, the idea that I dislike losing more than I like winning. But there's lots of them. And I think, overall, we agree, at least I tend to think that biases are a bad thing. Being more rational can be helpful. We still need to be emotional, right? But the question becomes, how do you actually start to de-bias yourself? And this is a really hard question. This is 6 steps from effectivology, which tries to help you get through these biases that you may have. The first step is always, a bias is triggered, and then the second step is the one that I get caught up on. So how do we actually develop awareness of a bias, especially when we talk about biases like the blind spot bias? It's where you don't know that you're actually being impacted by those biases. And so, in the practice that I do, I try to understand how do we include more uncertainty in the things that we do. And so this is related to a story. And the story is, in 2002, Ludum Dare is a game jam that uses randomly generated themes for people to hack on a game for about 48 hours. And when I was actually at a company called Horizon Ventures out of Hong Kong, we did a lot of educational philanthropy, worked with a lot of universities. And so for one of the university groups that we worked with was to create a hackathon between engineers and designers. And as part of that hackathon, we knew that people would, 1, try to just work with other people that they knew, and 2, they would probably prepare things that they would usually do. And so from this, we ended up using a system to, 1, randomly assign engineers and designers together. We, 2, would automatically generate a randomized theme. And then 3, we made them work basically on something that they'd never worked before. So I don't know if people are familiar with dioramas. It's something that I built when I was in grade school as part of school projects. But we asked them to do this. And this was something that was not culturally that they're very used to. And so after assigning all of these different random elements to this hackathon, we actually got some pretty amazing results. And so this is Steve Jobs playing ping pong on the beach in the style of Baroque. And the thing that you can't see here is that there's actually mechanisms by which the mechanism will be triggered. And so what this really said to me is that I'm sure that these students would have done a great job without all of this randomness, but they created things that we never would have expected. And so from my perspective, randomness really gets us out of these comfort zones that we have. And I think getting out of comfort zones is something that we need to do more and more as we start to consider how we do more innovation, how we do more new things. And so why is that? And maybe the way that this is related to things like artificial intelligence and machine learning is Kenneth Stanley, who's actually at Uber AI now, created a bunch of papers and did some work around basically novelty-based search. And so novelty-based search, this is an image from PicBreeder, which uses basically novelty to evolve algorithms to create pictures. And it didn't start this way, though. So it actually started as some fairly rudimentary images, things that we wouldn't have expected to actually turn into something that was as nice as a skull or a butterfly. But through thousands and thousands of generations, people were guiding this randomized process towards novelty. And no one would have expected at generation 1 that image on the left would have turned into a butterfly on the right. And so that really struck, for me, the fact that creativity is about appropriate novelty. It's not about pure randomness. Pure randomness just creates garbage, right? And so when we think about the biases that we're trying to de-bias ourselves from, it's essentially those safety zones or those comforts or that kind of, you're avoiding the novelty of the situation. And so one of the ways that I've started to think about this is kind of like a matrix multiplication, where you have randomness, you have a bunch of people's contexts that are guiding it, and that X up there is for all of your teammates. And then that turns into ideas, and sometimes, not always. You do get garbage out of this when you do it. So in practice, we've started to use things like randomness during Crazy Eights. So Crazy 8, if you're not familiar, it's where you have to sketch 8 sketches in 8 minutes. And it's usually for everybody on the team, even people that don't draw, they have to participate. And at the time, I had just bought a new deck of cards called Oblique Strategies. And it was created by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt to really help break musicians or writers out of kind of a blocked situation. And they have a lot of statements, they have questions, they have scenarios. And what they're meant to do is to make you reconsider the way things are. And so we started using this whenever we're doing Crazy Eights. We'll draw a new card per frame. And again, we've definitely created lots of great ideas without these cards. But I also feel like the variation that we've been able to get by using this type of mechanism is much, much larger. And so around that time, I then found out about these trigger cards. These trigger cards are actually about 60 different questions, in this particular case around human-centered design, that you should be asking. But the problem is that we don't have time for every decision we're going to make to ask those 60 questions. And so what we do is we randomly draw 5 of those things, and we have reconsidered our situation in a way that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. And then going a step further, it's a really great article about the I Ching, which is a fortune-telling technique from ancient China. And this method is not so much about spiritualism, at least the way that I've interpreted it. And this author, Will Buckingham, said that it wasn't so much about the fact that he was trying to tell his future, but it was that he was trying to get beyond whatever the false certainties that he had and to reconsider opportunities. And so, of course, I always have to take things a step too far. And I've started to do basically tarot readings for products. And the way that this works is it's not so much that this is the way that your product is going to work out, but when you look at your product through the lens of like where it is today, what is the basis for it, what's the past, what's the future, and what's the goal, you actually end up reframing the whole problem and maybe reinterpreting what your constraints are. And so just a final thought is that if we can increase the amount of uncertainty that we consider, it can help break us out of a lot of these biases. And randomness is one of those techniques. So including this in all of your processes, both for ideation, but also for understanding prioritization. And this can be through cards, this can be through dice, this can be coins, it can really be anything. And we need to build more novel things, right? Like the basics are kind of taken care of a lot of the time. And for us to be able to solve really hard, complex problems, we don't always actually know the causal effect or the causal chain for those things. And so to explore, using randomness really helps with that. And so I just would say, be more random and be less biased. Thank you.